The Mary Rose was a Carrack class warship designed and built during the reign of King Henry VIII. Launched in 1511, it saw service as a flagship of the fleet in a number of battles against the French during its 34 years of use. A myth about the Mary Rose is often believed to be that it sank on its maiden voyage, but that couldn't possibly be the case if it had been in service for 34 years. What is believed to be true, though, is that the loss of the ship was potentially caused by the one thing it was designed to give an advantage during combat: its heavy cannons. It's theorised that in 1545, during a battle with the French at the Battle of the Solent, a gust of wind made the vessel list to one side as it was turning to bring its guns to bear, causing the gun ports to enter the water and subsequently flood the ship. Over 450 of the 500-man crew were unfortunately lost. In 1982, the remains of the Mary Rose were raised from the seabed, and it can be viewed at its museum in the historic Portsmouth dockyard. Hey guys, Matt from Model Minutes here, and today I'm going to be building the 1:400 scale Mary Rose plastic model kit from Airfix. A model set that I think is great for beginners. Something to dip your toes in the proverbial sea of scale modelling. This particular model comes from a gift set with paints that are included, but I will use some extra ones during my build of this kit, which you can see on the list on screen. Airfix recommends this kit to those aged 8 years and older. I first got this model back in 2018, having received it from a discount supermarket here in the UK, and made a start building it in 2019. In this video I'll be focusing on the build and review of the model, but if you'd like an in-depth review of the components inside the box, take a look at the unboxing video I made. As you can expect from a starter or gift set, there is a set of instructions, some decals, there are also some stickers in this set for flags, and included are 4 acrylic paints, a tube of cement and a paintbrush. Before I started building the model, I gave the 3 grey plastic sprues a quick wash in warm soapy water. This would make sure that any mould release or dirt was removed from them to give a clean surface for paint and cement to stick to. I left them to air dry. For all the parts, I would either snip them off the sprue using my cutters or carefully slice them away with a sharp knife. The rough plastic would then be sanded smooth with a sanding stick. Fortunately, there is virtually no flash on this model, which needs cleaning up. I'm using Revell contactor cement at the moment, as the applicator needle makes getting the glue in the right place really easy. This is one of the cements I would suggest getting to a beginner as they start to progress on their modelling journey. The 2 bulkhead parts were cemented to the top of the ship. The top of the ship is then glued into one half of the hull. The fit is really good and it slots into the moulded grooves. The lower gun deck was glued in as well, again fitting into some slots. The stern part can be added onto the back of the ship, then this is followed by the other half of the hull. I had to apply some pressure to hold it in place until the glue had started to set. The masts need their little lookout points, or crow's nests, added onto them. A small amount of cement was applied and then they were pushed into place. These parts are on each of the 4 masts, so is slightly repetitive, but gets completed quite quickly. The masts were then added to the ship, taking care to get them in the right holes, as they are all slightly different heights and have specific locations. I added the one on the bow of the ship, then finally the rudder, and small mast at the stern. The display base comes in 4 parts. The 2 mounts are cemented into their respective slots on the plinth, with a supporting beam joining them together. Now it's time to start some painting. I'm leaving the sails off for now and will add them closer to the end. I'm using the Humbrol 110 natural wood matte acrylic paint for the majority of the woodwork, following the painting instructions included in the box. Sadly, the paint in my set had started to dry out, so I revived it with some Tamiya X20A acrylic thinner. I was lucky that this worked, as otherwise I would have had to buy another pot of this colour. I brushed this thinned down paint all over the model. Thinning the paint increases the drying time, but also helps to avoid leaving visible brushstrokes. I would end up putting about 3 layers of this paint on the model. I used the included 103 cream matte acrylic to paint the sails, again thinning the paint with a few drops of Tamiya acrylic thinner. Again, a couple of layers would be needed to get a good even finish. I used some of this paint to very carefully highlight the rope attached to the anchor. And that's as far as I went during 2019. Sadly, due to various reasons, this got put on the shelf for about a year as I focused on other projects. But about 12 months later it returned to the workbench, and here I'm thinning Tamiya XF2 flat white paint with Tamiya acrylic thinners. I decided to use this paint as I knew from experience that the included white paint in the set is quite hard to use and has poor pigment density. I'm very fortunate that I can afford to purchase new paints and kits for these projects, and part of the reason for this is down to the generosity of my patrons on Patreon and channel members here on YouTube. Thanks to all of you guys, and if you'd like to join these people on screen, check out the links in the description to find out more about the extra perks you get. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome Martin to the club as my latest supporter on Patreon. Alternatively, to support my channel for free, click that subscribe button and turn notifications on so you never miss a modelling video. Anyways, back to the painting. I carefully painted the areas of the ship that needed this white paint. I used a fine brush to try and get accurate placement. Again, a few coats would be needed to get a uniform finish. If you're a beginner, just try your best here, and if you get it wrong, you can always go back over the white with the brown you used earlier. Speaking of the brown, I used this to colour the top supports of the sails, again using a fine brush. Humbrol Satin Varnish Acrylic number 135 was thinned with a drop of water and then brushed onto the model. This is going to form a base for the decals. The slightly glossy paint will provide a nice smooth surface and prevent the transfers from silvering when they are applied shortly. Speaking of the decals, these are well printed and look great. If you're not a fan of decals, then this might not be the kit for you, but there aren't that many and they make a great practice piece, testing your accurate placement of them. I cut the sheet into more manageable sections. I'm using Microset and Sol from Microscale as my decal setting solutions in this build. Again, another great product to get if you're just starting out. The blue bottle is brushed onto the model in the areas the decals are going to be placed. The second red bottle is brushed over the top afterwards to soften the decal into the surface of the model. The decals were soaked in warm water until they started to release from their backing paper, excess water being blotted away by a paper towel. After brushing Microset onto the model, the decal is carefully slid into place. I used this wooden stick to carefully position the decal and get it in the right place. Smoothing out the surface with my finger or a cotton bud will help remove any ripples or air bubbles. I repeated this exact process on the ship, getting all those fine decal strips into place before the decal solution really started softening them into the surface. These decals can be a little fiddly and time consuming, but with some patience, the results are well worth it. My suggestions if you are a beginner is to work one decal at a time. Work methodically and carefully, ensure you check the instructions before placing them on just to make sure they are right. When the decals were all on and in position, I carefully brushed the Microsol from the red bottle to help soften them further. I waited until now to do this, as the transfers have already started to stick to the surface of the model and the risk of dislodging them has decreased. I left the transfers overnight to dry, and the next day I coated them with Humbrol 49 Matte Clear Varnish Acrylic. I thinned this paint with some hot water after it had been properly mixed. The mixing and hot water will help avoid leaving a white residue that this particular paint sometimes leaves. Brushing this all over the decals on both the base and ship will help seal them, protect them, and give them a uniform finish. It's time to add a little bit of weathering to bring out some of those details. I applied my homemade black enamel wash to the entire model, which is made from Humbrol 33 matte black enamel and white spirit. For more information on how to make this wash, check out the tutorial on my channel. I painted this onto the sails to try and give a weathered effect, as if it had seen use during various kinds of weather. Being fabric, I can't imagine they would have stayed particularly clean for long. I brushed it onto the display base to bring out the details around the anchors and on the trim. The ship itself also took a coat of this wash to add shadow and contrast around the various details. I took care to not apply too much though and ruin the paint finish that was already on there. When the wash had dried, Humbrol 53 Gunmetal Grey was very carefully painted onto all those cannons protruding from the gun ports. I used a fine brush to do this. The anchor was also given a layer of this paint along with the metal banding around the rudder. I thought it would be nice to go slightly off the instructions here and used Tamiya X12 Gold Leaf acrylic paint to pick out the 2 anchors on the display base. This paint was again thinned with a little acrylic thinner. I think this small addition helps to make it stand out a little more. The model is very nearly complete. Small amounts of cement were added to the masts and then the sails were carefully positioned. You might have to hold them in place as they dry, and just be aware that they should be at an angle to the main hull of the ship, as if they are catching the wind. Just take your time with this step as it can be a little fiddly, and I did find that they fell off a few times. Also, be careful with that cement as you don't want to get it in the wrong places and ruin that paintwork you've already applied. With that done, the final step is to add the 2 stickers which represent the flags. These are peeled from their backing paper and then folded around their respective masts. I like that Airfix have included these, as they should last much longer than the decals they included on their HMS Victory set for this purpose. Over time, the decals became brittle and flaked off, but paper stickers shouldn't suffer the same fate. With that done, I add the ship to the base and now it's complete. Not including the 12 months this kit sat on my shelf, it only really took a couple of days to complete this stage. Hardcore modelers out there would probably extend this build further by adding rigging, but I'm not sure my skills are at that stage yet in such a small scale. Maybe in the future I will revisit this one and see about adding some. I'll talk a little about the statistics of this kit before I round off my review. The tooling for this kit dates from 2014 when it was first released as part of a starter set. The version I have here dates from 2018, which, although identical to the starter set version in almost every way, it actually has a different item code and comes contained within a single box, whilst the starter set version has a card header. I guess this is really a gift set than a starter set, but to me there's no real difference. As mentioned previously, it was purchased in a discount supermarket here in the UK for £5 at the time, and has been available at that price a number of times in subsequent years. Normally, however, you'd be looking at paying twice that for a normal starter set version, so if you can get it at the cheaper price, I would certainly recommend it. Does it justify the higher price then? Well, kind of. If you desperately wanted this kit, I can't really fault it for what it is, but knowing that it's been at the lower price a number of times, I'd be a little reluctant forking out an extra £5. So, why is this kit perfect for a beginner? Well, the mould quality is really good, as you would expect from a model tooled in 2014. There is no or very little flash, the parts have a good level of detail, and they all fit together nicely with no filler required and only a tiny bit of sanding here and there. Those little slots, grooves and holes mean that every part lines up and fits where it's supposed to. The decals are well printed with crisp colours and apply to the model really nicely. The instructions are quite clear and easy to follow, along with the painting instructions on the back of the box. If you wanted to build it straight out of the box using just the included paints, I'm sure you'd end up with quite a nice model. But my extra few steps here would really help a beginner develop their skills whilst not having to worry about the absolute basics. Well, what skills are we talking about? Firstly, thinning your paints will help them look much better than just coming straight out of the pot. Secondly, the use of a few extra paints like the gold add just a little more character to the build. The use of decal solutions is quite simple, but should help make those decals look so much better than if they were applied with just water. Finally, a super simple homemade wash brings out those details and makes the model look just that little more realistic. So although this has been a fairly plain sailing build with not many steps needed to complete it, it's perfect for a beginner as they can either build it as it is as a great introduction to the hobby, or use it like I did for a basis of trying some slightly more advanced techniques and products. I think this kit provides both the right level of easy and straightforward construction with slightly more difficult aspects like the decals and some fine paintwork to give you a little bit of a challenge. And with that, I think it's time to end this one here. As always, let me know what you think of my model in the comments below, and do you agree with me that this is a perfect kit for newcomers to the hobby? Feel free to leave a suggestion for other builds or videos you might like to see too. Check out the links in the description to connect with me on social media. Finally, a massive thank you to you for watching this one, and I'll see you on the workbench again next time.